Hi, my name is Paul Saint-Amour. I teach at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm going to read from episode 15, the Circe episode of Ulysses, the sort of Walpurgisnacht, or Witch's Sabbath of the book. It's a scene toward the end of the episode and one of the climaxes of the episode, in which Bloom and Stephen are in a brothel. Someone puts a coin in the player piano, and everything and everyone begins to dance, not just the people in the room, but earlier episodes from the book, language itself, the hours of the day, and everything kind of gets faster and faster and more confusing until it ends in this maelstrom of language and brings us to a moment where a certain ghost appears. I'd like to dedicate this reading to the memory of John Bishop, a wonderful person and really path-breaking Joyce scholar whom we lost earlier this month to COVID-19. Zoe twirls round herself, heel tapping. Dance! Anybody here for there? Who'll dance? Clear the table. The pianola with changing lights plays in waltz time the prelude of My Girl's a Yorkshire Girl. Stephen throws his ash plant on the table and seizes Zoe round the waist. Florrie and Bella push the table toward the fireplace. Stephen, arming Zoe with exaggerated grace, begins to waltz her round the room. Bloom stands aside. Her sleeve, falling from gracing arms, reveals a white flesh flower of vaccination. Between the curtains, Professor McGinney inserts a leg on the toe point of which spins a little silk hat. With a deft kick, he sends it spinning to his crown and, jaunty-hatted, skates in. He wears a slate frock coat with claret silk lapels, a gorget of cream tulle, a green low-cut waistcoat, stock collar with white kerchief, tight lavender trousers, patent pumps, and canary gloves. In his buttonhole is an immense dahlia. He twirls in reverse directions a clouded cane, then wedges it tight in his oxter. He places a hand lightly on his breastbone, bows, and fondles his flower and buttons. McGinney. The poetry of motion, art of calisthenics. No connection with Madame Leggett Burns or Levinston's. Fancy dress balls arranged. Deportment. The catty Lanner step. So, watch me. My terpsichorean abilities. He minuets forward 3 paces on tripping bee's feet. Tout le monde en avant. Révérence. Tout le monde en place. The prelude ceases. Professor Goodwin, beating vague arms, shrivels, sinks, his live cape falling about the stool. The air in firmer waltz time sounds. Stephen and Zoe circle freely. The lights change, glow, fade gold, rosy violet. The pianola. 2 young fellows were talking about their girls, 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 sweethearts they'd left behind. From a corner, the morning hours run out, gold-haired, slim-sandaled in girlish blue, wasp-waisted with innocent hands. Nimbly they dance, twirling their skipping ropes. The hours of noon follow in amber gold. Laughing, linked, high hair combs flashing, they catch the sun in mocking mirrors, lifting their arms. McGinney clip-claps gloved silent hands. Carré! Avant deux! Breathe evenly, balancez. The morning and noon hours waltz in their places, turning, advancing to each other, shaping their curves, bowing vis-a-vis. Cavaliers behind them arch and suspend their arms with hands descending to, touching, rising from their shoulders. Ours. You may touch my. Cavaliers. May I touch your? Ours. Oh, but lightly. Cavaliers. Oh, so lightly. The pianola. My little shy little lass has a waist. Zoe and Stephen turn boldly from looser swing. The twilight hours advance from long land shadows, dispersed, lagging, languid-eyed, their cheeks delicate with cypria and false faint bloom. They are in gray gauze with dark bat sleeves that flutter in the land breeze. McGinney. Avant huit, traversez, salut, cours de main, croisez. The night hours, one by one, steal to the last place. Morning, noon, and twilight hours retreat before them. They are masked with daggered hair and bracelets of dull bells. Weary, they curchy under veils. The bracelets. Hey ho, Zoe twirling her hand to her brow. Oh! McGinney. Les tiroirs, chaînes de dames, la corbeille, dos à dos. Arabesquing wearily, they wave a pattern on the floor, weaving, unweaving, curtsying, twirling, simply swirling. Zoe. Oh, I'm giddy! She frees herself, droops on a chair. Stephen seizes Florrie and turns with her. McGinney. Boulangère, les ronds, chevaux de bois, les ponts, escargots. Twining, receding with interchanging hands, the night hours link each with arching arms in a mosaic of movements. Stephen and Florrie turn cumbrously. McGinney. Dansez avec vos dames, changez de dame, donnez le petit bouquet à votre dame, remerciez. The pianola. Best of all, ba-da-bum. Kitty jumps up. Oh, they played that on the hobby horses at the Myris Bazaar. She runs to Stephen. He leaves Florrie brusquely and seizes Kitty. A screaming bitterns, harsh high whistle shrieks. Groan grouse gurgling tofts, cumbersome whirligig, turns slowly the room right round about the room. The pianola. My girl's a Yorkshire girl. Zoe. Yorkshire through and through. Come on, all! She seizes Florrie and waltzes her. Stephen. Pas seul! He wheels Kitty into Lynch's arms, snatches up his ash plant from the table, and takes the floor. All wheel, whirl, waltz, twirl, bloom, Bella, Kitty, Lynch, Florrie, Zuby, Zoe, jujube women. Stephen with hat, ash plant, frog splits in middle high kicks, with sky-kicking mouth, shut hand clasp, part under thigh. With clang, tinkle, boom, hammer, tally-ho, horn blower, blue, green, yellow, flashes, tofts, cumbersome, turns with hobby horse riders from gilded snakes dangled, bowels, fandango, leaping, spurn, soil, foot, and fall again. The pianola. Though she's a factory lass and wears no fancy clothes. Close-clutched swift, swifter with glare, blare, flare, scudding. They scoot, loot, shoot, lumbering by. Ba-da-bum, tutti. Encore! Bis! Bravo, encore! Simon. Think of your mother's people. Stephen. Dance of death! Bang, fresh barang, bang of lackey's bell, horse, nag, steer, piglings, con me on Christ-ass, lame, crutch and leg sailor and cockboat arm-folded, rope-pulling, hitching, stamp, hornpipe, through and through, barabam, on nags, hogs, bell horses, gathering swine, corny and coffin, steel shark stone, one-handled Nelson, two trickies, Frauenzimmer, plum-stained from pram, falling, bawling. Gum, he's a champion. Fuse blue pier from barrel rev evensong love on hackney jaunt blazes blind cod-doubled bicyclers dilly with snowcate oh fancy clothes then in last switchback lumbering up and down bump mash tub sort of viceroy and wren relish for my tub lumper bum rose bada-bum. Happy Bloomsday from the Rosenbach.
Hello, my name's Tom Teti, and I'm reading from the Circe section. Bloom shakes hands with both of the watch in turn. Thank you very much, gentlemen, thank you. He mumbles confidentially. We don't want any scandal, you understand. Father is a well-known, highly respected citizen, just a little wild oats, you understand. First watch. Oh, I understand, sir. Second watch. That's all right, sir. First watch. It was only in case of corporal injuries I'd have to report it at the station. Bloom nods rapidly. Naturally. Quite right. Only you're bound in duty. Second watch. It's our duty. Corny Kelleher. Good night, men. The watch, saluting together. Night, gentlemen. They move off with slow, heavy tread. Bloom blows. Providential you came on the scene. You have a car? Corny Kelleher laughs, points his thumb over his right shoulder to the car brought up against the scaffolding. 2 commercials that were standing fizz in jammets like princes, faith. One of them lost 2 quid on the race, drowning his grief, and were on for a go with the jolly girls, so I landed them up on Bayan's car and down to Nighttown. Bloom. I was just going home by Gardiner Street when I happened to... Corny Kelleher laughs. Sure, they wanted me to join in with the mots. No, by God, says I, not for old stagers like myself and yourself. He laughs again and leers with lackluster eye. Thanks be to God we have it in the house. What, eh? Do you follow me? Bloom tries to laugh. Yes. Matter of fact, I was just visiting an old friend of mine there, Viraj, you know. You don't know him. Poor fellow, he's laid up for the past week. And we had a liquor together, and I was making my way home. The horse neighs. Corny Kelleher. Sure, it was Ben, our Jarvey there, that told me after we left the 2 commercials in Mrs. Cohen's, and I told him to pull up and got off to sea. He laughs. Sober hearse drivers, what a specialty. Will I give him a lift home? Where does he hang out? Somewhere in Cabra? Where? What? Bloom. No, in Sandy Cove, I believe, from what he let drop. Stephen, prone, breathes to the stars. Corny Kelleher, a squint, drawls at the horse. Bloom in gloom looms down. Corny Kelleher scratches his nape. Sandy Cove. He bends down and calls to Stephen. Hey? He calls again. Hey? He's covered with shavings anyhow. Take care they didn't lift anything off him. Bloom. No. I have his money and his hat here and stick. Ah, Corny Kelleher. Ah, well, he'll get over it. No bones broken. Well, I'll shove along. He laughs. I've a rendezvous in the morning, burying the dead. Safe home. The horse neighs. Bloom. Good night. I'll just wait and take him along in a few. Corny Kelleher returns to the outside car and mounts it. The horse harness jingles. Corny Kelleher from the car, standing. Night. Bloom. Night. The Jarvey chucks the reins and raises his whip encouragingly. The car and horse back slowly, awkwardly, and turn. Corny Kelleher on the side seat sways his head to and fro in sign of mirth at Bloom's plight. The Jarvey joins in the mute pantomimic merriment, nodding from the farther seat. Bloom shakes his head in mute, mirthful reply. With thumb and palm, Corny Kelleher reassures that the 2 bodies will allow the sleep to continue for what else is to be done. With a slow nod, Bloom conveys his gratitude, as that is exactly what Stephen needs. The car jingles Toraloom round the corner of the Toraloom lane. Corny Kelleher again reassure-looms with his hand. Bloom with his hand assure-looms Corny Kelleher that he is reassure-loomite. The tinkling hoofs and jingling harness grow fainter with their Toraloo-lulu-lay. Bloom holding his hand, Stephen's hat, festooned with shavings and ash plant, stands irresolute. Then he bends to him and shakes him by the shoulder. Bloom. Eh? Ho! There is no answer. He bends again. Mr. Dedalus? There is no answer. The name, if you call, somnambulist. He bends again, and, hesitatingly, brings his mouth near the face of the prostrate form. Stephen! There is no answer. He calls again, Stephen! Stephen groans. Who? Black Panther? Vampire? He sighs and stretches himself, then murmurs thickly with prolonged vowels. Who? Drive? Fergus? Now. and pierce, woods, woven shade. He turns on his left side, sighing, doubling himself together. Bloom, poetry, well educated. Pity. He bends again and undoes the buttons of Stephen's waistcoat. To breathe. He brushes the wood shavings from Stephen's clothes with a light hand and fingers. £1.7. Not hurt anyhow. He listens. What? Stephen murmurs. Shadows. The woods. White breast. Dim sea. He stretches out his arms, sighs again, and curls his body. Bloom, holding the hat and ash plant, stands erect. A dog barks in the distance. Bloom tightens and loosens his grip on the ash plant. He looks down on Stephen's face and form. Bloom communes with the night. Face reminds me of his poor mother. In the shady wood, the deep white breast. Ferguson, I think I caught. A girl. Some girl. Best thing that could have happened. He murmurs. Swear that I will always hail, ever conceal, never reveal any part or parts, art or arts. He murmurs, in the rough sands of the sea, a cable tow's length from the shore, where the tide ebbs and flows. Silent, thoughtful, alert, he stands on guard, his fingers at his lips in the attitude of secret master. Against the dark wall a figure appears slowly, a fairy boy of 11, a changeling, kidnapped, dressed in an Eton suit with glass shoes and a little bronze helmet, holding a book in his hand. He reads from right to left, inaudibly, smiling, kissing the page. Bloom, wonderstruck, calls inaudibly, Rudy! Rudy gazes unseeing into Bloom's eyes and goes on reading, kissing, smiling. He has a delicate mauve face. On his suit he has a diamond and ruby buttons. In his free left hand he holds a slim ivory cane with a violet bowknot. A white lambkin peeps out of his waistcoat pocket.
Rais'd her lamp above to light the way to thee, my love, to light the way to thee, my love. Her rays upon the waters play to tell my eyes more bright. delight. I come, my heart's 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 delight.
Hello, I'm Megan Rosenbloom. I'm a librarian living in Los Angeles, but I'm originally from the Philadelphia area. One of the hardest parts about leaving Philadelphia was stopping being a docent at the Rosenbach. Along with the Noonan Museum, it's one of my favorite places on earth, and James Joyce's Ulysses is my favorite book. I'm reading from chapter 16, Eumaeus, in which we find our pal Stephen Dedalus a little worse for the wear. Some scholars say this passage is Joyce intentionally writing badly. So let's just agree that any poor reading that I do of it is also intentional. Preparatory to anything else, Mr. Bloom brushed off the greater bulk of the shavings and handed Stephen the hat and ash plant, and bucked him up generally in orthodox Samaritan fashion, which he very badly needed. Stephen's mind was not exactly what you would call wandering, but a bit unsteady, and on his expressed desire for some beverage to drink, Mr. Bloom, in view of the hour it was, and there being no pump of Vartry water available for their ablutions, let alone drinking purposes, hit upon an expedient by suggesting, off the reel, the propriety of the cabman's shelter, as it was called, hardly a stone's throw away near Butt Bridge, where they might hit upon some drinkables in the shape of a milk and soda or a mineral. But how to get there was the rub. For the nonce, he was rather nonplussed, but inasmuch as the duty plainly devolved upon him to take some measures on the subject, he pondered suitable ways and means, during which Stephen repeatedly yawned. So far as he could see, he was rather pale in the face, so that it occurred to him as highly advisable to get a conveyance of some description, which would answer in their then condition, both of them being ED'd, particularly Stephen, always assuming that there was such a thing to be found. Accordingly, after such preliminaries as brushing, in spite of his having forgotten to take up his rather soap-suddy curt handkerchief, after it had done yeoman service in the shaving line, they both walked together along Beaver Street, or more properly, Lane, as far as the farrier's, in the distinctly fetid atmosphere of the livery stables at the corner of Montgomery Street, where they made tracks to the left, from thence debouching into Amiens Street, round by the corner of Dan Bergen's. But as he confidently anticipated, there was not a sign of a Jehu plying for hire anywhere to be seen except a four-wheeler, probably engaged by some fellows inside on the spree, outside the North Star Hotel. And there was no symptom of its budging a quarter of an inch, when Mr. Bloom, who was anything but a professional whistler, endeavored to hail it by emitting a kind of whistle, holding his arms arched over his head twice. This was a quandary, but bringing common sense to bear on it, evidently there was nothing for it but put a good face on the matter and foot it, which they accordingly did. So, beveling around by Mullet's and the signal house, which they shortly reached, they proceeded perforce in the direction of Amiens Street railway terminus. Mr. Bloom being handicapped by the circumstance that one of the back buttons of his trousers had, to vary the time-honored adage, gone the way of all buttons, though. Entering thoroughly into the spirit of the thing, he heroically made light of the mischance. So, as neither of them were particularly pressed for time, as it happened, and the temperature refreshing, since it cleared up after the recent visitation of Jupiter Pluvius, they dandered along past by where the empty vehicle was waiting, without a fare or a jarvey. As it so happened, a Dublin United Tramways Company's sand strewer happened to be returning, and the elder man recounted to his companion, apropos of the incident, his own truly miraculous escape of some little while back. They passed the main entrance of the Great Northern Railway Station, the starting point for Belfast, where of course all traffic was suspended at that late hour, and passing the back door of the morgue, a not very enticing locality, not to say gruesome to a degree, more especially at night. Ultimately gained the Dock Tavern and in due course turned into Store Street, famous for its C Division police station. Between this point and the high, at present unlit, warehouses of Beresford Place, Stephen thought to think of Ibsen, associated with Baird's The Stonecutters in his mind somehow in Talbot's Place. First, turning on the right, while the other, who was acting as his fidus Achates, inhaled with internal satisfaction the smell of James Rourke's City Bakery, situated quite close to where they were, the very palatable odor indeed of our daily bread, of all commodities of the public, the primary and most indispensable. Bread, the staff of life, earn your bread. Oh, tell me, where is fancy bread? At Rourke's the baker's, it is said. En route to his taciturn and, not to put too fine a point on it, not yet perfectly sober companion, Mr. Bloom, who at all events was in complete possession of his faculties, never more so, in fact, disgustingly sober, spoke a word of caution re the dangers of Nighttown, women of ill fame and swelled mobsmen, which, barely permissible once in a while, though not as a habitual practice, was of the nature of a regular death trap for young fellows of his age, particularly if they had acquired drinking habits. Under the influence of liquor, unless you knew a little jujitsu for every contingency, as even a fellow on the broad of his back could administer a nasty kick if you didn't look out. Highly providential was the appearance on the scene of Corny Kelleher, when Stephen was blissfully unconscious. But for that man in the gap turning up at the 11th hour, the finis might have been that he might have been a candidate for the accident ward, or failing that, the bridewell, and an appearance in the court next day before Mr. Tobias. Or he being the solicitor, rather, Old Wall, he meant to say, or Mahoney, which simply spelt ruin for a chap when it got bruited about. The reason he mentioned the fact was that a lot of those policemen whom he cordially disliked were admittedly unscrupulous in the service of the Crown, and, as Mr. Bloom put it, recalling a case or two in the A Division in Clanbrassil Street, prepared to swear a hole through a 10-gallon pot. Never on the spot when wanted, but in quiet parts of the city, Pembroke Road, for example, the guardians of the law were well in evidence, the obvious reason being that they were paid to protect the upper classes. Another thing he commented on was equipping soldiers with firearms or sidearms of any description, liable to go off at any time, which was tantamount to inciting them against civilians, should by any chance they fall out over anything. You frittered away your time, he very sensibly maintained, and health, and also character besides, which, the squandermania of the thing, fast women of the demi-monde ran away with a lot of pounds, shillings, pence into the bargain. And the greatest danger of all was who you got drunk with, though. Touching the much vexed question of stimulants, he relished a glass of choice old wine, in season, as both nourishing and blood-making and possessing aperient virtues, notably a good Burgundy, which he was a staunch believer in, still never beyond a certain point, where he invariably drew the line, as it simply led to trouble all around, to say nothing of your being at the tender mercy of others practically. Most of all, he commented adversely on the desertion of Stephen by all his pub-hunting confreres but one, a most glaring piece of ratting on the part of his brother medicos under all the circs. And that one was Judas, Stephen said, who up to then had said nothing whatsoever of any kind. Discussing these and kindred topics, they made a beeline across the back of the custom house and passed under the loop line bridge, where a brazier of coke burning in the front of a sentry box, or something like one, attracted their rather lagging footsteps. Stephen, of his own accord, stopped for no special reason to look at the heap of barren cobblestones, and by the light emanating from the brazier, he could just make out the darker figure of the corporation watchman inside the gloom of the sentry box. He began to remember that this had happened, or had been mentioned as having had happened, before. But it cost him no small effort before he remembered that he recognized in the sentry a quondam friend of his father's, Gumley. To avoid a meeting, he drew nearer to the pillars of the railway bridge. "Someone saluted you," Mr. Bloom said. A figure of middle height, on the prowl evidently under the arches, saluted again, calling, "Night!" Happy Bloomsday from the Rosenbach.
Hello, I'm Margaret Kelleher. I'm Professor of Anglo-Irish Literature and Drama at University College Dublin, and I'm delighted to be part of the Rosenbach celebration of Bloomsday today. For us at UCD, Bloomsday marks the chance to celebrate our most famous alum. But for me personally, it's also a chance to connect with friends and scholars across the globe in the United States and Brazil and China and so many other countries. And indeed to be reminded as an educator of that wonderful literary miracle whereby a text so stunningly specific is so gloriously global. I'm reading from chapter 16, Eumaeus. Mr. Bloom and Stephen entered the cabman's shelter, an unpretentious wooden structure where prior to then he had rarely if ever been before. The former having previously whispered to the latter a few hints anent the keeper of it, said to be the once famous Skin-the-Goat Fitzharris the Invincible, though he could not vouch for the actual facts, which quite possibly there was not one vestige of truth in. A few moments later saw our two noctambules safely seated in a discreet corner, only to be greeted by stares from the decidedly miscellaneous collection of waifs and strays and other nondescript specimens of the genus Homo already there, engaged in eating and drinking, diversified by conversation, for whom they seemingly formed an object of marked curiosity. Now, touching a cup of coffee, Mr. Bloom ventured to plausibly suggest to break the ice. "It occurs to me you ought to sample something in the shape of solid food, say, a roll of some description." Accordingly, his first act was with characteristic sang-froid to order these commodities quietly. The oi polloi of Jarvies or stevedores or whatever they were, after a cursory examination, turned their eyes, apparently dissatisfied, away, though one red-beard, bibulous individual, portion of whose hair was greyish, a sailor probably, still stared for some appreciable time before transferring his rapt attention to the floor. Mr. Bloom, availing himself of the right of free speech, he having just a bowing acquaintance with the language in dispute, though to be sure rather in a quandary over voglio, remarked to his protégé in an audible tone of voice, apropos of the battle royal in the street, which was still raging fast and furious, "A beautiful language, I mean, for singing purposes. Why do you not write your poetry in that language? Bella poetria. It is so melodious and full. Belladonna, voglio." Stephen, who was trying his dead best to yawn if he could, suffering from lassitude generally, replied, "To fill the ear of a cow-elephant? They were haggling over money." "Is that so?" Mr. Bloom asked. Of course, he subjoined pensively at the inward reflection of there being more languages to start with than were absolutely necessary. It may be only the southern glamour that surrounds it. Happy Bloomsday from the Rosenbach.
Oh, I wish I was on yonder hill It's there I'd sit and cry my fill, and every tear would turn a mill. Is go jay to ma fornin slán. Siúil, siúil, siúil arún. Siúil go sugar agus siúil go ciún. Siúil go Derick agus éilí lum. Is go jay to ma fornin slán. Oh, I'll dye my petticoats, I'll dye them red, and round the world I'll beg my bread, until my parents wish me dead. Is go jay to ma fornin slán. Siúil, siúil, siúil arún. Siúil go sugar agus siúil go ciún. Siúil go Derick agus éilí lum. Is go jay to ma fornin slán. Oh, I've sold my axe, I've sold my wheel, to buy my love a sword of steel, so it in battle he might wield. Oh, my Johnny's gone for a soldier. Siúil, siúil, siúil arún. Siúil go sugar agus siúil go ciún. Siúil go Derick agus éilí lum. Is go jay to ma fornin slán.
I'm Margaretta Noonan, and on this Bloomsday 2020, I want to thank the Rosenbach for the great programming they do all year round with some of the best educators in the Philadelphia area. And when the world turned upside down this spring, they were able to move a lot of that programming online. And I'm very grateful for the Rosenbach staff and all of the many donors who keep this learning community going. Happy Bloomsday.
I'm Jack Noonan. I want to thank the Rosenbach for giving me Ulysses. Reading Ulysses and enjoying it, beginning to understand it, has been a lot more fun than lugging it unread around the world for 60 years. So for that immeasurable gift, thank you, Rosenbach, and happy Bloomsday.
I'm Derick Dreher. I'm the director of the Rosenbach. I'm going to read a passage from chapter 16, Eumaeus. This is toward the end of this great book, Ulysses. Bloom and Stephen have been having a long conversation. They've been dropping all kinds of names in that conversation. They've been talking about high culture. They've been using phrases in French and Latin and German. Of course, they don't really understand those phrases. They may not really even know who the names are they've been dropping. And so their effort to show us how cultured they are kind of fails. And we see that at the end of this chapter as the narrator shifts the focus away from these two men concluding their conversation as they walk off into the night, and instead shows us the perspective of a street sweeper and his horse. On the roadway which they were approaching, while still speaking beyond the swing chains, a horse, dragging a sweeper, paced on the paven ground, brushing a long swathe of mire up so that with the noise Bloom was not perfectly certain whether he had caught aright the allusion to 65 guineas and John Bull. He inquired if it was John Bull, the political celebrity of that ilk, as it struck him, the two identical names, as a striking coincidence. By the chains, the horse slowly swerved to turn, which, perceiving Bloom, who was keeping a sharp lookout as usual, plucked the other's sleeve gently, jocosely remarking, "Our lives are in peril tonight. Beware of the steamroller." They thereupon stopped. Bloom looked at the head of a horse not worth anything like 65 guineas. suddenly in evidence in the dark quite near so that it seemed new, a different grouping of bones and even flesh, because palpably it was a forewalker, a hip shaker, a black buttocker, a tail dangler, a head hanger, putting his hind foot foremost while the lord of his creation sat on the perch, busy with his thoughts. But such a good poor brute, he was sorry he hadn't a lump of sugar, but as he wisely reflected, you could scarcely be prepared for every emergency that might crop up. He was just a big, nervous, foolish, noodly kind of horse, without a second care in the world. But even a dog, he reflected, take that mongrel and Barney Kiernan's, of the same size, would be a holy horror to face. But it was no animal's fault in particular if he was built that way, like the camel, ship of the desert, distilling grapes into potheen in his hump. 9/10 of them all could be caged or trained. Nothing beyond the art of man, barring the bees. Whale with a harpoon hairpin. Alligator tickle the small of his back, and he sees the joke. Chalk a circle for a rooster. Tiger, my eagle eye. These timely reflections anent the brutes of the field occupied his mind, somewhat distracted from Stephen's words while the ship of the street was maneuvering, and Stephen went on about the highly interesting old. What's this I was saying? Ah, yes. My wife, he intimated, plunging in medias res, would have the greatest of pleasure in making your acquaintance, as she is passionately attached to music of any kind. He looked sideways in a friendly fashion at the side face of Stephen, image of his mother, which was not quite the same as the usual handsome blackguard type they unquestionably had an insatiable hankering after, as he was perhaps not that way built. Still, supposing he had his father's gift, as he more than suspected, it opened up new vistas in his mind, such as Lady Fingal's Irish Industries, concert on the preceding Monday, and aristocracy in general. Exquisite variations he was now describing on an air. Youth Here Has End by Jans Peter Svelink, a Dutchman of Amsterdam, where the Frau's come from. Even more, he liked an old German song of Johannes Jaep about the clear sea and the voices of sirens, sweet murderers of men, which boggled Bloom a bit. Von der Sirenen Listigkeit tun die Poeten dichten. These opening bars he sang and translated extempore. Bloom, nodding, said he perfectly understood and begged him to go on by all means, which he did. A phenomenally beautiful tenor voice like that, the rarest of boons, which Bloom appreciated at the very first note he got out, could easily, if properly handled by some recognized authority on voice production, such as Barraclough, and being able to read music into the bargain, command its own price, where baritones were 10 a penny, and procure for its fortunate possessor in the near future an entree into fashionable houses in the best residential quarters of financial magnates in a large way of business, and titled people where with his university degree of B.A., a huge ad in its way, and gentlemanly bearing to all the more influence the good impression he would infallibly score a distinct success, being blessed with brains which could also be utilized for the purpose, and other requisites if his clothes were properly attended to, so as the better to worm his way into their good graces, as he, a youthful tyro in society's sartorial niceties, hardly understood how a thing like that could militate against you. It was in fact only a matter of months, and he could easily foresee him participating in their musical and artistic conversaziones during the festivities of the Christmas season for Joyce, causing a slight flutter in the dovecotes of the fair sex and being made a lot of by ladies out for sensation, cases of which, as he happened to know, were on record. In fact, without giving the show away, he himself, once upon a time, if he cared to, could easily have. Added to which, of course, would be the pecuniary emolument, by no means to be sneezed at, going hand in hand with his tuition fees. Not, he parenthesized, that for the sake of filthy lucre he need necessarily embrace the lyric platform as a walk in life for any lengthy space of time. but a step in the required direction it was, beyond yea or nay, and both monetarily and mentally it contained no reflection on his dignity in the smallest, and it often turned in uncommonly handy to be handed a check at a much-needed moment when every little helped. Besides, though tastes latterly had deteriorated to a degree, original music like that, different from the conventional rut, would rapidly have a great vogue, as it would be decided novelty for Dublin's musical world after the usual hackneyed run of catchy tenor solos foisted on a confiding public by Ivan St. Austell and Hilton St. Just and their Genus Omne. Yes, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he could, with all the cards in his hand, and he had a capital opening to make a name for himself and win a high place in the city's esteem, where he could command a stiff figure and, booking ahead, give a grand concert for the patrons of the King Street house, given a backer-up if one were forthcoming to kick him upstairs, so to speak. A big if, however, with some impetus of the go-ahead sort to obviate the inevitable procrastination which often tripped up a too-much feted prince of good fellows. And it need not detract from the other by one iota, as, being his own master, he would have heaps of time to practice literature in his spare moments when desirous of doing so, without its clashing with his vocal career or containing anything derogatory whatsoever, as it was a matter for himself alone. In fact, he had the ball at his feet, and that was the very reason why the other, possessed of a remarkably sharp nose for smelling a rat of any sort, hung on to him at all. The horse was just then, and later on at a propitious opportunity, he purposed, Bloom did, without anyway prying into his private affairs on the fools step in where angels principle, advising him to sever his connection with a certain budding practitioner who, he noticed, was prone to disparage and, even to a slight extent, with some hilarious pretext when not present, deprecate him, or whatever you like to call it, which in Bloom's humble opinion threw a nasty sidelight on that side of a person's character. No pun intended. The horse, having reached the end of his tether, so to speak, halted and, rearing high a proud feathering tail, added his quota by letting fall on the floor, which the brush would soon brush up and polish, 3 smoking globes of turds. Slowly, 3 times, one after another, from a full crupper he mired, and humanely his driver waited till he, or she, had ended, patient in his scythed car. Side by side, Bloom, profiting by the contretemps, with Stephen passed through the gap of the chains, divided by the upright, and, stepping over a strand of mire, went across towards Gardner Street lower, Stephen singing more boldly, but not loudly, the end of the ballad, Und alle Schiffe brücken. The driver never said a word, good, bad, or indifferent, but merely watched the 2 figures as he sat on his low-backed car. Both black, one full, one lean, walked towards the railway bridge to be married by Father Mar. As they walked, they at times stopped and walked again, continuing their tete-a-tete, which, of course, he was utterly out of, about sirens, enemies of man's reason, mingled with a number of other topics of the same category, usurpers, historical cases of the kind, while the man in the sweeper car, or you might as well call it in the sleeper car, who in any case couldn't possibly hear because they were too far simply, sat in his seat near the end of Lower Gardner Street and looked after their low-backed car. Happy Bloomsday.
Bloomsday 2020 is made possible through a generous grant from the Consulate General of Ireland's Immigrant Support Program. This project is also supported through the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, the federal state partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Special thanks to Lenny Steiner and Perry Lerner, and to the South Jersey Celtic Society. Thank you so much for supporting Bloomsday 2020.